Hello, Ryan here, and welcome to Star Citizen Sunday. This is a weekly show which covers all of the news from the week just past. Be sure to subscribe if you like what you see, and let's get on with it. This week, we learn more about master modes and how Cloud Imperium are continuing to refine it. We take a deeper look at all things FPS coming in 3.2.3, but most importantly, the testing of server meshing and jump gates continues, alongside increasing the player count to 400 players. So let's kick off this week's show with the biggest and most important news of the week, which is the server meshing jump gate test. On Friday night, or Saturday morning, Cloud Imperium released a new Evocati build on the tech preview channel, in which there were two servers statically meshed together, with one running Stanton and the other running Pyro, but both being on the same shard, just as we saw with the first test. But this time, players are able to travel through the Stanton Pyro jump point to go from one system to the next, with the replication layer handing everything from one server to the next as they do. Now this test is running over the weekend, so it is still underway, and the feedback from what I can see is that the process of doing this, which is what they are specifically testing, worked perfectly, with the only issue being you could end up exiting the jump point in somewhat of a random location in Pyro or Stanton, or even directly fly into another player's ship, as you would all exit at the same point. Something, of course, they will fix. You can also see other players in the jump tunnels at the same time, and even shoot at each other, which is supposed to be the intention with jump points anyway, as Chris outlined a few years back. But visually, they are not final, they are very basic, and as stated, it is just the tech that they are testing here, so it was a great success. Now, as if that wasn't exciting enough, over the weekend, starting on Saturday night, Cloud Imperium were running a couple of focused 2-hour playtests, with firstly increasing the player count to 200 per server on Saturday, and then 400 players the following day, if all went well, asking Evocati to just play as normal. And according to the Evocatis, when it was reaching closer to the 400 player count, there was a lot more desync. If there are any other Evocati out there who have more insight into what their experience was in all areas of this test, but obviously including how you found the game when you were in a somewhat close to 400 player server, do let me know in the comments below. Now, as I've said earlier, it is important to point out that they are likely just testing how the process works and making sure that it works, with players transitioning from one server to the next through the jump gate, with the replication layer and crash recovery working as well. And that, it looks like, was a great success. But there is a lot more stuff to do to get this game release ready, and hopefully they are still on course for summertime this year. But that is wonderful news, and again, a time in history to remember for the development of Star Citizen. So great work to Cloud Imperium, and here is to further tests, and let's hope it all goes smoothly. But with that said, let us get to Inside Star Citizen. So this week's Inside Star Citizen was a deeper look at all of the upcoming FPS combat changes coming in Alpha 3.23. Now, it began with Jared explaining that over the next few weeks, for Inside Star Citizen, we will be checking out more and more of the upcoming 3.23 features, like persistent hangars, the new visor lens, the inventory and shopping apps, and the character customizer, which is actually on next week's Inside Star Citizen, plus much more. So really excited for the foreseeable of Inside Star Citizen, especially next week's. So on to the FPS changes, starting with reloading. For Alpha 3.23, we will have the ability to reload from our backpack with a bit of a time delay versus if a magazine was attached to your suit. And basically, if you have used all of your magazines that are attached to your suit, the next time you reload, it will pull the magazine from your backpack, but with an additional time cost, as it would take longer to grab one from a backpack than on your suit, but you won't have to mess around in the inventory screens just to reload. Now this, I feel, is a great addition and a lot more realistic. You can still spend time moving your magazines from your backpack to your ammo slots on your suit if you wanted to, but if you're in a bit of a situation where you don't want to go eyes off and you need to reload, you can do so, and it will be slightly quicker than having to go to your inventory, but slightly longer than getting it from your suit. Now, the UI on the helmet visor will also indicate if your next magazine swap is going to be pulled from your backpack, which is a nice touch, so if you have time to reorganize your magazines, it'll give you a heads up to do so. This would also be a great option, I feel personally, just for the combat style helmet visors, giving another benefit to using the combat helmets versus other helmets, as we will see for the dynamic crosshair. Now next up they spoke about ammo repooling, which means if you have a few magazines, each at less than full capacity, you will be able to hit a key, and then your character will play a simple rummaging animation to indicate that they are condensing the ammo from each magazine into full magazines, and then automatically discard the empty ones. Now again, I'm very happy to see this as a function, as it is a much needed addition, but in the future, I suppose when we are likely able to craft ammunition of varying types, I would like to be able to keep those magazines rather than discard them so that I can fill them. There is also a little nuance affecting the speed at which you repool your ammunition. For example, repooling ammunition for a small pistol will take less time than a large rocket launcher. Although that said, I personally think the amount of ammo per magazine should also factor into this, as sticking 3 rockets or a couple of rockets into the Animus magazine should not take as long as reloading up to 25 small individual bullets into a pistol mag. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. Also, after 323, they will be looking into throwables and consumables, being able to repool the med pens, for example, plus ammo-style canisters for devices like the multi-tool will still need to be determined. So, lots more to come, but a great start. Now, I know it was mentioned that this auto-repooling is more likely to be a temporary measure for the time being, and they will offer the option for filling mags ourselves. And I get to many this doesn't sound fun, so I expect they will always keep the auto-repool feature, but I do like the idea of maybe being able to add different individual bullets myself so that I can put maybe a tracer towards the end of a mag to help indicate when it's running low, or maybe fill one magazine with armor piercing versus another one with a different ammo type, so that I can have a range of options. So a great change for Alpha 323, but I would love to see more detail in the future and see where it goes. Next up, they spoke about recoil, and across the range of weapons there is a wide range of recoil, from very subtle to pretty wild. This will depend on the gun, the size of the gun, and I expect down the line again, ammunition type. But they did decide to place recoil on energy-based weapons to add a bit of game fun and balance, rather than taking the more sort of traditional sci-fi route of energy weapons or laser weapons having no recoil. Now personally, I think it would be cool to offer none to severely less recoil to energy-based weapons at maybe a reduced damage cost, while also having the option to recharge your magazines. Whereas for ballistic ammo, of course recoil is realistic, but maybe offer greater damage than energy-based weapons, with the other punishment being you have finite ammunition. That I feel would also lean into 0G and the EVA pushback when using energy versus ballistic, and will provide a much greater range of decision making for players when choosing a weapon for whatever situation. For example, do you take an energy weapon to have a more stable shooting platform with the ability to recharge your mags, but at a reduced damage output, or do you go full ballistics with finite ammo, more recoil and more damage? So you could use energy-based weapons when exploring, where ammo might be hard to come by, but you don't know if you'll need to use a weapon or not, versus going into straight-up combat where you know it's going to happen, you know you'll likely be able to loot ammunition, but you might need that extra damage. Now I feel that that idea fits a little more with Star Citizen as a whole. That is my feedback, I hope it can be heard, but do let me know what you all think. That is just my opinion. Now one very cool new addition is the procedural recoil system, which means recoil will be very different from shot to shot. It sounds like sniper rifles and pistols will have this procedural recoil system to begin with for 323, and then they'll apply that to other weapons later on. Also, do note the new updated Bearing P4, which I love, and now truly fits with the Bearing family. Next, they have also reworked the iron sights for the majority of the weapons, giving a much better visual, making the guns look less fat, taking up a lot less screen space, while making the sightline cleaner too. So a great addition there. All scopes and sights have been reworked as well with new shaders, parallax effect and reflections, as you see with most AAA shooters these days. Also, each type of scope has a different effect based on whether it's a holographic scope, telegraphic, or maybe TV screen scope. The shader will look different. They also want to apply multiple zoom levels if applicable, which I think they're working on now. So this looks great, and I'm very happy that they have addressed all of the scope types. After CitizenCon, I messaged Ali Brown on Twitter, who is the Senior Technical Director for Graphics and Procedural Tech, if picture-in-picture scopes would ever be possible, just to get rid of that ability for players to have a sort of full zoomed screen when using scopes, as it is obviously quite cheaty. And he said that it is not going to be possible right now, as technically you are rendering a scene twice when using picture-in-picture, and that can be extremely heavy on performance, and as a result, it'll be a heavy hit of lag or stuttering right as you're zooming in, which is certainly not a great time for that to happen. But he did say that they will likely look into blurring the exterior when zooming in, so that you don't get that option to cheat as such, which I did notice in the monthly report this month, that they are adding blur to the exterior of the scopes, so that is great, and hopefully in the future, if performance is possible and tech advances enough, the option of picture-in-picture is possible. But what we have for 323 is fine by me. And then finally they spoke about the dynamic crosshair, which again is only going to be applicable to combat-style helmets, which I do love the idea of. At first, when I saw the crosshair, I was a bit like, I don't want this artificial crosshair just floating in my screen. It takes away the immersion, it doesn't add anything for skill. But if it is only visible on the right kind of helmet, then I am all for it. Now, this crosshair shows you exactly where your weapon's barrel is pointing, and as you can see when peeking around corners, it will actually help quite a lot to ensure that you are accurate, or that you are shooting downrange and not just shooting the corner of the wall. They did say that all of this can be deactivated along with hit markers, so you can turn them all off if you want, but with it being a multiplayer game, I will probably just leave it as contextual to the helmets that I'm using. Now, one thing that I was a little unsure about was the scope glint effect, which eventually gives the position away of the user. Now, I'm not completely opposed to it, as I'm sure it's somewhat needed for balance to a degree, but I think this should be tied more to the manufacturer and maybe the quality of the scope. For example, a high-end scope from, say, Gemini would not give off any glint, as it would likely have been treated with anti-glare, just to meet that high-end expectations. However, a low-quality brand, or even a sight that has been crafted on the frontier or by players using low-quality materials, could give off some glint, then I think that would suit Star Citizen much more than, say, every scope showing glint, if that is the case. Of course, we don't know yet, as we haven't actually tested these in-game yet. Again, that is just my 2 cents, but that was a great episode with a lot of very interesting features coming for 323 to take FPS to the current standard that we expect for AAA games. But with that said, let us move on. So this week's Star Citizen Live was a Q&A about all things Master Modes. The first question being, how will Master Modes affect non-combat ships and pilots? So they say there is no real difference in regards to the 2 modes available, being Nav Mode and SEM Mode. Every ship will use Nav Mode when travelling around, and they will use SEM Mode when they are using whatever their role is for. So for example, the Prospector or Vulture would use the SEM Mode when mining or salvaging, and then using Nav Mode when they want to travel around. Now they say that this won't mean industrial ships will be easy fodder, they will balance where appropriate, and if you are in Nav Mode, if a situation comes up, you will most likely be able to escape, but there are also many other dependencies that will help to balance out this situation. Master Modes is not just about combat, they have worked all of the ships in game, not just the combat ships, and they are going to tune these ships to make it fair for everybody. For Alpha 323, they are adjusting all the ships to use the appropriate flight archetype, with much more detailed tuning for each ship individually coming later on. Next question is, can you explain how quantum dampeners and quantum snares will work on ships while in Nav Mode? Now they're saying that both quantum dampening and snares will have a big impact on SEM Mode and combat itself, but it is all yet to be implemented. It is on the to-do list for 323, but they are unsure as to whether it will make it in for this patch or later down the line. Now there is a lot to work out for this in terms of balance, they say, like does it stop you completely from boosting away? Will the size of the ship matter? Do they just change the spool times and so on and so forth? Alpha 323 will not be the full Master Modes update, and so we'll need to work this all out as time goes on. It is also worth pointing out that even though the quantum interdiction stuff is not necessarily releasing at the same time as the Master Modes work, that doesn't mean that they don't work out a plan for how it will fit into the game when it is ready to release. They do concept ideas way beforehand to save time later on. Now, it is clear throughout the whole of this talk that Master Modes has a lot to it, and what we have in Arena Commander is very basic. For 3.23, it is much more advanced than the Arena Commander Master Modes tests, but still not complete. And then into the future, there will be a lot more to add to Master Modes specifically, as well as other systems like the Resource Network, the Maelstrom damage system, each impacting the Master Modes massively. So the continued tuning and balancing of Master Modes will last quite a while, but will all make sense eventually. Next question, will we be able to stay in Nav mode and travel everywhere avoiding combat? What is planned for Nav mode limitations? So you will be able to always stay in Nav mode if you so chose, but whether it's suitable for every situation is a different question. You won't be able to use your ship's main functions like salvaging, mining, your weapons and so on. Your scanners will work, but your guns, missiles, shields, those sorts of things won't be functional. So essentially you will be more vulnerable if attacked, but if you are all spooled and ready to go, you might be able to get away easier, but you will not be invulnerable. Next question, how will Master Modes work in atmosphere? Now, they say it will work exactly the same as in space, but with the limitations of drag. So I suspect Nav Mode will allow you to travel as fast as that particular ship can travel in atmosphere based on its own aerodynamic ability, but switching to SEM mode in atmosphere will restrict you to the same speed limitations that you would have in space, but again with the potential addition of drag depending on the ship and the planet's atmospheric makeup. Next question is, are there any plans for SEM or Nav mode transition times to differ between ships? And yes, the swap time will be different per ship, defined firstly by a value that will be set for each ship by themselves, but then also the quantum drive will have a big impact here. The engineering systems as well, so Resource Network, will impact this and give players the option to adjust preferences, but the Resource Network is not this team's purview, so he didn't want to speak further about that. For example though, interceptors will be able to switch very quickly as it is their role, and usually the larger the ship, the longer it takes to spool. Unless you have a large ship that's, say, specialized in this role, that might be able to change quicker. Now, I really like the idea of having a bit of control over this via the Resource Network, giving engineers something to really think about and coordinate as a team when maybe prepping a ship for a job or reacting to potential threats out in the black. Next question is, why is there no UI or HUD updates coming in with Master Modes in 3.2.3? Now, the new MFDs and HUD layouts that they showed at CitizenCon are not coming in for 3.2.3, but the new visor-based update UI will be, and this will include gunnery improvements, target brackets, and a bit more. So a partial UI update, but the rest is of course coming later down the line, as the UI team are heavily invested in working on the star map, local area maps, and the new mobiGlas update, which is completely understandable. Next question is, what are the struggles with Master Modes, and particular 1v1? Now, the main issues with 1v1, they feel, is mostly due to the speed limitations, in which both pilots hit maximum speeds very quickly. So you get stuck in this situation where no one can get an advantage over the other. Now, they say there is a lot they can do to make 1v1 better, as they have a lot of values exposed to them that they can tweak, like tuning the ship flight capabilities, how it handles, how well it cools, the weapon's reload time, and so much more. But it's never just a case of altering one value, and they are trying to break down these values deeply to get a big understanding of what is causing it. One option that they have provided is to use boost to accelerate your various vectors, like rotation speeds, to try and help gain an advantage over the opposition, which helped a bit, but not enough. They are also looking into smoothing out the accelerations a little to help create enough diversity between the ships or player actions and choices. They do plan to try other things as well, and we'll see how it all impacts the light fighter 1v1 battles, but when these Master Mode updates release to the PU, this will just be the next phase of testing and data gathering, and they will continue updating as they go. Next question is, how does the negative feedback affect the team? Now, they say it doesn't bring them down, they do see it as a challenge. They want all feedback, be that good or bad, as it is useful to providing an insight into what the problems could be. Obviously, the more constructive the feedback, the better, but oftentimes they purposely do add things into their tests that they don't think is a great idea, but they just want to see how it feels, how we feel about it, and most of the time they say our reactions match their thoughts, which shows them that they are on the right track. Which is a good point to make. Having these Arena Commander tests, and even the PU as a whole, it's a place for Cloud Imperium to test everything and see what works well, what might not work well, or that they might be unsure as to whether something is going to work or not. So just giving us the chance to try it and then learning from that. Next question, do you think Master Modes actually lowers the skill ceiling? And they say at the moment it does, especially for the 1v1, there is a lower skill ceiling there, but at the same time they are also trying to lower the skill entry level to make ship combat more plausible for players to get into and enjoy. The ceiling being lowered will rise again as they address the issues with the 1v1s, and as players spend more time in their ships, they will learn more about what their ships can do. Now I think when all is said and done, as always, Chris's idea of easy to get into, difficult to master, I think is where it's going. The skill ceiling will raise again as they add many more variables into the mix, which, for when it comes to flight and combat, and how players will learn their ship's strengths and weaknesses, manage their ship systems, and learn the new tactics that Master Mode brings, as of course the old tactics no longer apply because it's heavily changed. But there are just new tactics to learn, which will come through experience, and we will learn them. Next question is, how will Master Modes affect racing ships, with these ship speeds lowering and ships not being agile enough in Nav mode? Now the flight performance is not affected or adjusted between Nav and SEM mode. Your ship can still maneuver in the same way as in each mode, with the only difference really being the greater speeds and the inability to use your weapons. So what is actually missing from racing now is the absence of the overly advantageous G-forces that was present in tricording, which gives more acceleration when inputting 3 different directional inputs in one go, which is not a good thing and was providing a heavy artificial advantage. For racing, racetracks can also be adjusted to help them fit with the new Master Modes flight. Racetracks for the future could even support the option of needing to switch between SEM and Nav mode, and they will be adjusting things for ships and tracks to ensure that racing is balanced, fun, and feels great. Next question is, what is the intended effect when changing into Nav mode with other players in a multi-crew ship? For example, the Hammerhead crew will have nothing to do when a player is in Nav mode. Now, in a Hammerhead, of course, turret gunners won't be necessary, but with something like the resource network, that will give many players something to do inside of ships, like swapping out components or relays, maintaining them as well, amongst other things. Now right now, multi-crew gameplay is pretty much limited to turret gunners, but that is not how it's going to be in the future. There are many other roles for players on board the same ship to fill, like engineering, communication, navigation, security, and so much more. Next question, how does the power triangle work in Master Modes and in Nav mode? Now it is still very applicable as your ships and weapons in Nav mode are not powered down, they are still able to regenerate at a slower rate, and their power is just technically idle in a buffer, waiting for when you switch back to SEM mode, which will then regenerate quickly in comparison to when you actually power up your shields. So there is still a need to manage your power triangle, even when you're in Nav mode. Next question, can you use countermeasures in Nav mode? And they say they don't see any reason why they would want to allow this at the moment, but it could be made available if they see a reason to. It will really depend on feedback, and this decision will be made after further testing, as they really want players to try and counter missiles by maneuvering, for example, in Nav mode. Now this can be another aspect to use to balance the battle of escaping versus not escaping a conflict, and I personally think it is more viable to have countermeasures when in Nav mode, but of course this is something, as they say, they would like to test first, see what the benefits and the hindrances are, and then make a decision from that. Next question is, are there any changes to stealth mechanics in Master Modes? And they say they have put in changes to signatures in 3.22.1, and those have been inherited into the Master Mode system. And I think the biggest change to stealth will again be more applicable to when we get the resource network, having the components properly tuned, and give us the option to tune them ourselves to run a stealth profile perhaps. Next question is, how will you make Master Modes work and be balanced for players wanting to catch up and capture a ship? Now, you will be reliant on using dedicated equipment like, for example, a QED or distortion weapons, and with the quantum drive being the component that unlocks the navigation abilities, they are looking into allowing quantum drives to be more susceptible to distortion damage, However, distortion weapons will be less effective at taking down shields. In 3.22.1, shields are already very resistant to distortion weapons, and as with everything in Star Citizen, making the right choice in what equipment you need is very important, and will be even more important in the future for pirates or bounty hunters trying to capture their prey. Again, there is a lot of tuning and balancing to work out here, and so many variables that will give a huge amount of variety in how to achieve this, which will lead to players learning and gaining experience, practicing and getting better skills, which will ultimately determine success or failure. As for bounty hunting, for example, instead of just heading straight to your target to take them out or capture them, it might be beneficial to spend some time watching and observing them to gather data about their ship so that you can make a better decision on what to equip your ship with to be more successful in stopping them. And the final question is, what are your non-negotiable parameters when it comes to balancing? What are you unwilling to change? And they say nothing is off the table. They will change anything to ensure that it all works properly, even if that does mean increasing the SEM speeds. Nothing is fixed and everything will be considered, but it will take a lot of time to get it right. They look at spectrum, they analyze our feedback and observe what we are doing to better understand what is best. And post 3.2.3, they are looking for ways to deepen what we have, with that being the framework for these systems, and beyond this, it is adding much more depth to all of these areas, either to help balance or further the gameplay. And there is going to be a lot of data that they can gather to help improve and expand on it. Now, it is safe to say that there is a lot to do here in further developing this system until it is everything they want it to be and we want it to be. It needs to work for everybody and be balanced across the board for everyone as well, with the main determining factor always being skill and knowledge. No ship will be rendered useless, and no ship will be overpowered. To start with, there will certainly be discrepancies while we are testing it until it is all tuned and balanced, and then it will be up to us to learn our ship's strengths and weaknesses and employ them in the right way. Now, that was a great episode, which I hope helped a lot of players who are concerned about master modes, including myself. I was never 100% sold on every aspect of it, but it is helping me to relax that there is more to come and nothing will be left behind and everything will be tuned and tweaked accordingly. Now, next week's Star Citizen Live will be with the FPS team answering our questions based on this week's Inside Star Citizen, but let us move on. So also this week, both the Persistent Universe and Squadron 42 monthly reports were released, which I will release my coverage of next week. The roadmap was updated as well, with 2 very exciting new additions to Alpha 3.23. I will link my video addressing these in the description below. Plus, March's subscriber promotions are announced. So that brings us to the end of the show. If you do enjoy my content, please consider subscribing and hitting that like button. Also, I am able to do this thanks to my very generous patrons and channel members. If you appreciate what I do and would like to help make it even better from as little as $1 a month, all of the links are provided below.